So good to see you.
It's good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no, thank you for, I was saying before, you regularly save our bacon and are here, and it's just such a delight. And we thank you so much for being here. Evelyn, tell them a little bit about your experience in the field of autism and what you do at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders.
Well, I've been here a long, long time. I predate the BCBA certificate. So it's been almost 30 years now of being in this field and working with kids with autism and adults. And I've done training. I've been training supervisors and just giving consultation probably for the last 25 years heavily. And then the other part of my job in the last 10 years is developing our skills curriculum. So my technology skills have increased quite a bit, but just being able to work on all the systems that support ABA. And, you know, whether it's in curriculum or data collection or whatever, but my real love and joy is still in consulting on kids and trying to problem solve and trying to help families figure out, you know, how to make life work, essentially. So
which you are amazing at, and we all run to you for advice about those kinds of things. I can't think of the number of times that I've been like, we got to get Evelyn on the case. We got to get Evelyn on the phone. So, and though, although you said you predate the title of BCBA, you are a BCBA.
Yeah, I am.
I just want to make that clear for people who are wondering. So we frequently have people who will write in questions to us throughout the week, and those are sort of our starter questions that we start. And somebody had written in a question last night and this morning that I didn't even get a chance to send to Evelyn. So the person says, I have a question. I hope it'll make it on today's segment. I have a 3-year-old son. He gets 30 hours a week of ABA. His BCBA mentioned to me that she's going to incorporate relational frame theory in his treatment plan. I tried to read it in the internet, what relational frame theory is and how it's applied to children with autism. However, I still don't understand how RFT is applied and what its difference from traditional ABA. And can you please help me understand? Now, Evelyn, as I understand it, you know, you are absolutely an expert in the field of autism and you're an expert in the field of ABA, but I'm guessing that you are not an expert in the field of RFT. That would be asking.
Yeah, I am not an RFT expert, but I predate RFT.
There we go. There we go.
So
you know a little bit.
So I know a little bit because when people started researching it, they came to CARD and they said, what do you guys do? Because in reality, relational frame theory is what they call a modern ABA technique.
Okay.
So what happens is ABA is an umbrella. And under the umbrella of ABA, there are all these different types of techniques that can be used to teach language, skills, whatever it may be. So, you know, under the umbrella of ABA, you might hear about discrete trial training or natural environment training or pivotal response training, or, you know, and RFT lands under one of those. It's not a technique for learning, but it's probably like an area of how kids learn. And the area it relates to that I do know a lot about is perspective taking. Okay, so perspective taking is a primary area of a deficit in autism. People with autism have a really hard time taking someone else's perspective. And, you know, you might hear the term theory of mind. And it's like just the idea of mind or perspective taking. In the ABA world, they had a really hard time dealing with those terms because it wasn't concrete. Everything is operationally defined in the ABA world. And it was very difficult to define what mind was or perspective without using the term in a way of what they would in ABA is called circular reasoning. One exists without using another, and you kind of go in this circle, and none of it's very concrete and operationally defined enough. So relational frame theory came out of trying to define how some kind of verbal thought would relate to learning. And so RFT has really taken off in the last 10 years because they had to figure out a way to how to describe, you know, this idea of mind or perspective and how you learn. And so there is no way I'm an expert in it, and I won't even try to say what it actually is. But what it relates to in let's say in our terms or in our skills curriculum term, which is all based on research also, is the idea of perspective taking, be able to take somebody else's perspective. And in real life and development, the beginning of perspective taking starts around 9 months old. And it's the baby sitting in the high chair, and they drop their sippy cup, and mom reaches over and picks it up and puts it back on. And then there's this, let me see if I throw it again, will they pick it up again? And lo and behold, it's like this amazing cause and effect idea that starts to form, that if I do this, it makes somebody else respond. And from there, you start to see the idea of senses, like I can smell a perfume and I think, well, mommy, this smells good. But then somebody else smells it and they're like, ew, yucky. And that's at the beginning of the formation of the idea of, I like this smell, but you don't. And in the real world, real perspective taking, the example I always use comes around 4 to 5 years old. And I always use the example of playing hide and seek, because in kindergarten, typically the majority of the kids actually can't play hide and seek. They're giggling in the corner, their arms are sticking out of places they're hiding, because they don't realize that somebody else can see or hear them when they're hiding. But by the end of kindergarten, the majority of the kids can play hide and seek, and they're actually much better at it. They still might have issues like how loud they're laughing and giggling in the corner, you know? And there are some kids that still have arms and legs sticking out of, everywhere, so everybody can find them immediately. But you can really see that in that kindergarten year, how their idea of, I have to think, like, I don't want this person to find me, so I have to be quiet, or I don't want this person to find me, so wherever I'm hiding, they can't see any part of my body. So like that is really where the year where you start to see the idea of perspective taking. And then it continues to develop in research through the age of about 10 or 12 years old. And it goes through like being able to understand sarcasm. I said something and it's not true, but it's so not true that it's absurd so that it becomes funny, But the idea of knowing when things happen, when plans change, knowing that if somebody was there or heard, how much do they understand? And within the idea of theory of mind, there is like different levels. So there is like the first level, which is strict out, like if you hear me, you use your senses. If you saw it, if you know it, if you heard it, that's how you know about it. But if Shannon and I Trevin were talking and Trevin walked away and Shannon and I changed our plans, if the person understands that second order of theory of mind, they would know that Trayvon wouldn't know about our change in plans. He would still think our plans are whatever he heard or was a part of at that time. So, there's different levels and you start to see it in people. And there is some research, like by the age of 12 or 13, if you've never had any teaching on theory of mind, through experience of life, you realize, wow, when mom's not in the room, I don't get in trouble for doing something that I wasn't supposed to do. So it does come for a lot of people with autism on that basic level. But really being able to understand theory of mind teaches you about, like, you can't lie well if you don't have theory of mind. But you also can't discriminate when somebody's teasing you for fun versus teasing you to be mean if you don't have a good perspective taking. You don't understand jokes or the difference between lying and a magic trick that's for fun. A lot of our kids have these arguments in school, or they come home, they don't know whether something happened on accident or on purpose. So if a kid bumps into them in the hallway, if they don't have good perspective taking, they're thinking that person's trying to hurt them. So the intention, the idea of understanding intentions, that's the whole development of perspective taking that's out there. So if your person is starting to teach RFT at the age of 3, it's probably a good time, but just remind her that whatever skill you're teaching, you don't want the language level, the communication level needs to be at the same level. because you start to have problems. One thing I learned early on, and this is just pure by trial and error, is I remember teaching senses to a child who didn't have maybe the social understanding of what senses were, and besides identifying. But when he started to figure out on his own, and our kids are so smart, they figured out, like, I don't see it, so you can't, I don't get in trouble for it. So we had kids start throwing away parents' keys because they didn't want to go out. And you couldn't reason why those keys were needed and the language involved. So I would just encourage that you don't want to teach past their age of development. If you only want to teach what a 3 or 4-year-old is learning at that time. You don't want to go and try to teach something that's a lot higher level developmentally, not appropriate, because then it becomes, there's a lot of understanding that doesn't happen. And if language isn't keeping up also, you start to get discrepancies in terms of, there's a lot of prompting that happens when a lot of our people will come in and they'll start teaching perspectives, or BCBAs will come in and I'll look at the kid, and if their language level doesn't match, it ends up being the therapist prompting. A prompt dependency ends up coming, because then the therapist ends up being the one who constantly, the kid can only do it if the therapist asks the right question. So there's learning techniques that have to be there. But otherwise, there is a whole, RFT framework that is appropriate to a 3-year-old out there. It's just stay within that 3-year-old range, and it's a good thing.
Okay, very cool.
Hey, thanks for watching Autism Live. To subscribe, click here. And if you'd like to check out some more of our videos, click here.